A quick note on the purpose of recessions. The purpose of recessions? What is this guy talking about? Aren't recessions a disaster? An accident no one saw coming? Aren't they the root of all evil, that put hard-working people out of jobs, that they never find again, because the world is against the working woman and man? In everyday conversations and as well in the news media, recessions are often referred to like this. However, I'm going to take some time out to explain how recessions are a natural part of our economy. I always noticed that on average recessions have been happening once every decade, at least in the 20th century. I found that interesting, but I never quite understood why that is the case. Now, however, I do. Recessions can be caused by the central bank raising the national interest rate. The national interest rate is the lowest any bank can ask of you when taking out a loan. The higher the interest rate, the more loans will cost you to pay back. For most people, that means you either won't take out a loan because you couldn't afford it, or the amount of money available for borrowing is diminished. Naturally, this means businesses and consumers can't spend as much. Spending stimulates the economy. If a business can't get the startup funds it needs to build out a manufacturing wing for a product, it will make less or none of it. This means that product remains expensive for the consumer. This means the consumer will buy less or none of it. This is a simplified example of an economic slowdown. You're probably asking, why the F would the central bank want an economic slowdown? The reason the central bank raises the interest rates is because inflation begins to tick upward. Inflation can be caused by a lot of factors. I got into a few of them in the supply and demand chapter. However, I didn't explain in more detail specific examples of inflation. Let's say Jack works for a small grocery store as a clerk. Business is really slow. He doesn't take note of this or care, however. He's a teenager who's more interested in flirting with the girls he works with and scrolling through social media. To Jack, this is a really nice gig. He gets to basically slack off because there is very little clientele. Now, even though business is slow at Jack's small grocery store, it sometimes turns a profit maybe once or twice a quarter. Overall, however, the business over time is losing just a little less than it makes. This makes it somewhat economically viable during an economic growth cycle. However, because the store doesn't sell very much stock, the economic chain of events is cut pretty short. This is inflationary, eventually. While national interest rates are low, the store owner can apply for more and more loans to kick the can down the road in hopes for the business to pick up. It probably won't. What usually happens is, owners of such businesses stop investing in needed infrastructure. The money generated is from loans and not from clientele. The more loans he takes out, the more loan payments he has to pay back. This puts a strain in his ability to make the necessary adjustments to his business so that it may become more successful. Over time, usually right before the end of a decade, or right at the beginning of one, inflation has been creeping up. What I've noticed is central banks tend to let inflation heat up to around 6% before reacting. At this point they begin to raise interest rates. The point of raising interest rates is to bring the inflation rate to 2%. What the Fed is trying to do, although for political reasons they will not specifically say it, is they want businesses such as Jack's grocery store to shut. National interest rate hiking cycles are like a test. If you can last a hiking cycle, you're doing something right. If not, it's time to sell or declare bankruptcy and start over. Jack's grocery store is causing inflation because they're not producing enough. The job losses that come with a recession are sought after, not because the Fed wants people out of work. It's because they want people to be looking for whatever work there is left after all the zombie corporations, as establishments such as Jack's grocery store are called, cease to exist. It's not often acknowledged, but the unemployment number is the amount of people out of work who are actively looking for work, not people who just don't work. Also, this number is a number in flux. People are coming in and out of the state of unemployment all the time. Usually the unemployed find themselves in another job shortly after, out of necessity. Bills have to be paid, although it may not be in the sector they were in previously. So, the Fed keeps interest rates high in accordance to where inflation is. During this period is when you hear of massive layoffs. Also during this period is when you hear of sometimes staple institutions shutting their doors or being bought out. It's a cleanup, some even call it a reset. Not the Great Reset conspiracy that some people are sticking to. Just a general non-conspiratorial reset that happens every growth cycle to keep the economy humming away without mess. It's like an oil change for your car or cleaning out the lint filter in your drying machine. If you don't get an oil change, your engine will cease, and possibly form a crack and explode. If you don't clean out your lint filter, your dryer can probably burn down your house. Yes, it can cost $100 every 3 months to change your oil, leaving you without a car for 45 minutes or, gasp, a whole afternoon, but it's a small price to pay for keeping your vehicle running smoothly. It will also save you from a lot of hurt in the long term. Anyhow, during this period of high interest rates, inflation begins to come down. Prices start to regulate as the workforce find themselves in whatever is left. The GDP starts to tick up to a healthy growth rate. Once the inflation rate stays steady at 2%, the Fed stabilizes the interest rate to be more accommodating to businesses and consumers. Then the whole rodeo starts again until the next time inflation starts again. You may ask, why does the Fed allow people to open businesses that don't do well? Why are we allowing people to make mistakes and default on their loans? One reason is because the Fed isn't a governing body of people. Actually, it seems to be more of a reactive institution. It reacts to government policy and the actions of the civilian population. Not particularly due to their demands, but due to their actions. Another reason why the Fed doesn't have a say in who can open a business, or take out a loan, is because the purpose of a free market is to stimulate growth and innovation. No one knows who will reinvent the wheel. What I mean to say is, no one knows who can create a product or service that will elevate humanity to a greater state. No one could have known Steve Jobs would have created the iPhone. So holding individuals back would not only be morally wrong, but potentially a way to handcuff your economy from achieving the next great product or service. In order to achieve greatness, some fiscal eggs must be broken, and periodically cleaned up. Some of those eggs may not crack, they may be solid gold. They'll remain until the next batch of eggs are ready to take the plunge. Another way to think of the recession and growth cycle is like home renovation. During the construction process there is some destruction of an exterior wall. Lots of garbage and decay must be cleaned up. You have to live in your basement or garage for a time. It's a hassle, however. Once the reno is finished, you have a wonderful new hobby room or new bathroom to enjoy. The culture war regarding socioeconomics. I started off this segment with an explanation of recessions, because they're used in this culture war to pry a divide between socioeconomic classes. I want to refrain from saying rich and poor, because what does it mean to be poor? What kinds of people are poor? A lovely, sorry I don't mean lovely, a troubling phrase that is beloved by segments of the news media and the far left and right is, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. What are they measuring here? Are they measuring the wages of people, or the amount of people with certain wages? Very certainly I know they aren't taking account of anyone's age. The largest group of technically poor people in the workforce are part-time workers. The interesting thing about these part-time workers are, they are currently attending high school and college. Before we dissect the mystery of why these low earners are in high school and college, I would like to point out they aren't full-time workers. When these statistics are displayed on social media and by certain news organizations, it is never pointed out that these poor people are working part-time. If you don't put in the hours, you don't get the money. That's a very arrogant thing to say, author, is something I could hear. Perhaps you're right, or perhaps these individuals are choosing to have a limited amount of hours. Perhaps these individuals who are working these part-time jobs are not seeking out a 40-hour work week just yet. There must be something taking up their time. It must be school. Who fits this description? Students. Most students are young. Also, they would rather die than work full-time at a McDonald's. They'd rather take some extra cash for video games and snacks between studies. They want to be a lawyer, not a floor supervisor at a Walmart. Let's dive deeper into this mystery. Oh, how I love brain teasers like this. If these young students only work perhaps 2 days a week and make just enough for snacks and the odd video game, how do they pay the rent, feed, and clothe themselves? Oh my God, I totally forgot about mommy and daddy. When these statistics are displayed in attempt to tug at your heartstrings, they're wrapping up students as examples of the poor. Of course technically they fit the description, on paper, because of course they wouldn't claim they have a house. That's their parents' responsibility. Of course, I can dive deeper into the complexity, but I'll let you do that if you're so inclined. The reason I brought this up is because this topic is used to sow discontent between socioeconomic classes. And also, obviously there are cases where adults find themselves in a position where all they can find is part-time work. If an adult is in the position of working part-time at a grocery store, and they have to pay their own way through life, better believe they'll have 2 jobs. Perhaps 2 different sectors or something criminal. You should question someone who seems to pay the rent while working a part-time job at a coffee shop. Don't ask them questions, I mean. Just wonder. And perhaps keep your distance from them unless you want some cocaine. Anyhow, these memes on social media and reports by organizations that purport to be news are either purposely disregarding all the details in their argument, or are lazy and stupid to what could be so obvious if you look into it. Most of it is active disinformation from people selling their agenda that the rich should be made into ground beef for pasta sauce. These organizations and social media accounts that spread these messages are propped up fiscally by the Kremlin and sympathizers. Especially in times of economic strife, these messages are pumped out daily. Arguments are had in the comment section. Flames of true hatred and discontent is felt and fanned by espionage artists pretending to be regular social media users. Not to mention, certain social media influencers are espionage artists helping the Kremlin's cause. The rest of us are along for the ride. Some of us get swept one way or another. Hopefully we're all strong enough one day to see that we're being had. Before I finish, I want to add one more thing. Be wary of political figures who disparage the central banks for raising interest rates. If a public representative doesn't understand the reason central banks raise their rates, they have no place in governing others. It's fine for civilians who have so much on their plate not to be bothered with the functioning of the central bank. They're not expected to know. However, this leaves them vulnerable to government representatives they are meant to respect and trust are looking out for their best interest. Perhaps these politicians are truly concerned with job losses connected to central bank hikes. However, if you're serious about government and policy, one should be well aware of the responsibility of the central bank. They should know that their policy is without political bias. They're an objective entity. Criticizing the actions of the central bank is a very dangerous game to play. Especially if you're a person in power. It may cause political chaos or even riots in the streets. Who wants that? I know someone who does, for you that is. Putin. One final thing, a way to think about employment and the economy is: one doesn't work for the sake of work, one works for the sake of creating, or serving, for another, or many others. Think about that when looking for a job. Consider your job security in that regard. Next time I'll speak about those who are made to believe in crypto and the reasons they do.